Okay, lesson number 22. We are learning JavaScript, and we are learning JavaScript by examples. And in this series, we are recreating this application that is available on this website. And what it is a grid that has a random number of cells that are colored, and students have to type in a decimal fraction to represent the colored cells. Okay, in this case, it is 54. 0.54 is the correct answer. This is 0.76 is the correct answer. So in last lesson we created this grid, and if you refresh it, it will change the number of cells that are colored. So in this lesson we want to add this input field. I will show you the basic functionality, and then we will eventually create the same application. But I'll start with basic functionality so you know how it is done. So I will change the size of this window. I will close this. I will copy this and paste this. I will rename this to grid 8 because although it is 22nd lesson, but it is the 8th lesson on the grid. Open it up in browser and right mouse click and open with my Sublime text editor. Okay, so this is the code. This is the code that we created in our last video. First thing first, we want to add some message for the users, for them to know what has to be done. So I will add span tag, and I will say counting 1 to 100. How many squares are colored? If I save it now, refresh it, you have this message, and I want to change the style of it. So within these style tags, I will say span, and font size I want to change, and probably 17 pixels would be good enough. So if I save it and if I refresh it, you have this message, maybe 18 pixels. So we have this message that is a bit easier to read. The next thing that we want to do, we want to add an input field here, which is really easy. Under this table element, I will say input. Okay, so this is the basic input element. If I save it, refresh it, we have this input element where the students can type in an answer, but it's really bumping into the grid. So we can control that. We can, within the style tags, I can select the input element, and I will say margin 5 pixel auto. Okay, so 5 pixels from top and auto from left and right. If I save it and if I refresh it, you should see the input field moving down a little bit. Okay, 5 pixels down. The next thing that we want to do, if you look at the application, the grid is appearing in the middle of the page, or in the middle of the model in this case. So you want to move everything in the middle of the page. So I will create a div element and a closing div tag, and I will target all the div elements, and I will say margin 0 and auto, and I will also give it a width of 350 pixels, same as the size of the table. So 350 pixels. If I save it, refresh it, and maximize the page, the grid and everything is appearing in the center. We want to move this input field in the center as well as this text. So text align center, save it, refresh it, you have text center as well as the input field is also in the center of the page. Now if you notice, when I refresh it, all those students have the ability to type in. However, they have to click into this fields, and I don't want that. What I want, whenever we reload a page, the cursor should already be in this input field. So there are several ways we can say autofocus, and if I save it now, you will see that the cursor is within the input field. However, I also want the cursor to appear in the middle of the field, so we can say text align center as well. Okay, save it, and the cursor is appearing in the middle. So if I say 28, it is appearing in the middle of the page, but nothing happens. So we use this autofocus to within this input element, but I want to show you how to use JavaScript to move the cursor within the input field when a page is loaded. So I'll give it an ID of, say, my input. This is the ID of this element, and after these variables I will say this and square brackets, and I'll copy ID of this element, Control C and Control V, and dot focus. That should do the trick. If I save it now, refresh it, you can see that the cursor is available within the input field, same as it was. Now if I type in an answer, nothing happens because there is no functionality for it to compare this number and the number of cells that are colored. So to achieve this, we have to create a function, and the function keyword, and then name of the function, I will call it check answer, and this is the basic structure of a function. Function keyword, whatever name you want to use for the function, two parentheses and an opening and a closing curly bracket, which is the body of the function. And within the body of the function, I will say let answer. So I'm creating a variable by the name of answer, which is equal to document dot get element by ID, and we want to target this input field, and the ID of this input field is my input here. So copy and paste it here, and I want to say dot value. So what we want to do, whatever value has been typed in by the user, I want that value to be saved in this variable. Whatever value has been typed in by the user, I want to save it in this variable. Okay, and that keyword value will do that. This method will select this element with the help of ID, and the ID of this element is my input. Okay, as simple as that. Now what happens after this? If statement, and this is again the structure of if statement. I want to say if answer is equal to, now I want to compare the value of this input, which is this variable now, to this fill, which is responsible for creating a random number, and that random number is colored in this grid. So whatever number has been created by this statement, by this line of code, I want to compare it with the number that has been typed in by the user. And within these curly brackets, I want to say alert correct. So if the answer which has been typed in by the user is equal to this variable fill, then we should have an alert saying correct, else we should have an alert saying wrong. Okay, so we have created a function. In order to make it work, we have to call this function somewhere. So what we can do, we can create a button, and I will say check, save it now, refresh it. We have a button that says check, and I want to call this function when this button is clicked. So on click event, when this button is pressed, I want to call this function. Control copy and paste here. Okay, so we now have the functionality. If I refresh it, this is 38. If I type in 38 and press check button, I have an alert that says correct. If I say OK, nothing changes. Okay, the number of cells that are colored remain as it was. So we have to add another method, location reload. Okay, this is a built-in method that will refresh the page. If I save it now, refresh it, the number of colored cells is 82. I will press this button, correct. If I say OK, the page will be reloaded and a different number of cells will be colored and a different number of cells will be colored again. Okay, now every time to compare the answer we have to click this button. Okay, but if I press enter, 36 for example is the answer to this question. If I press enter, nothing happens. Okay, that is gonna be frustrating for the user. So what we can do, we can copy and paste this piece of code here, and I will remove this dot value. So we are using same variable name twice, but it will work because over here it is enclosed within a function and it will only be available when the function is called. Okay, now ideally you should create a different variable. However, I just wanted to show you that this will work. The difference here and here is that in this case we are saving this value that has been typed in by the user into this variable. Over here we are just targeting this whole element. Okay, and once we have saved this element in this variable, we want to say answer add event listener. We are adding an event listener to this input field, which is this one, and key up event fires whenever user releases a key. And on this key up event I want to run a function, and I will say E. I'm referring to this function, and an opening and a closing curly bracket, and I want to say if E key code is equal to 13. The key code 13 refers to enter key. If we are saying that if the key that has been pressed and released is 13, then document dot get element by id, we want to target this button this time with the help of this method. So button still does not have an id, so I will give it an id. I will call it btn. Okay, and I'll copy this id of this button and I will paste it here. Okay, and I'll say dot click. So what we are doing essentially, whenever enter is pressed, we are using JavaScript functionality to click this button, in fact. Okay, so if I save it now, refresh it, type in a number, I'm not pressing the check button. If I press enter, I have the same functionality. Okay, so this is also working. So we are essentially pressing this button with the help of JavaScript. If I say enter again, I have, it is actually 72. The answer is wrong, but anyway, this is the functionality. So we alternatively, we can also, I will comment this out. Alternatively, I can also run this function, copy and paste. If I save it again, refresh it, one cell is colored, I'm pressing enter, we are not using this button anymore. So I can actually remove this button and it will still work. If I save it now, and 57, the script is still working and it looks more like the script that is running over here. Okay, there's no button. But having said that, I just wanted to show you how to use a JavaScript method to click a button. So that's all for today. I'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you very much.